Okay, I am live. Where is my countdown? Welcome, brothers and sisters. And I especially want to welcome new subscribers to my channel. I am Regina. This is Readings with Regina, and my actual official title is Dr. Regina Jennings. And one of the reasons that I created this channel is because I want to contribute to the growth and development of my people intellectually. And science has shown that when you read or you are read to, there are neurons in your brain that make connections, and they would not have made those particular connections had you not been reading or had you not been read to. And I want to remind you all that looking at a movie, looking at television, that's a very passive act. You're just taking in impressions. And very often here in America, the movies they make, the television programs that they put on, they're not necessarily good for your growth and development. So this is the major reason why I put this video series, Readings with Regina, together. And I also want to remind you that any skill, any activity that you learn, something that's new that you learn, and even if it's difficult, if you stay with it, you will also make new neural connections in your brain. And I personally believe that while you are here on earth, you are here on earth to experience, to learn, to grow, and to make this planet a better place, to make it better than it was before you actually got here in this body or in your body. So also keep those things in mind as I read and as I talk to you, because it is imperative, I believe, and history proves me right. It is imperative that Black people read more than they are reading right now, especially young ones, because you youngsters, and I'm so old that anybody before 60 is a youngster to me. In any event, you have grown up in this media age. You have Facebook and Instagram and all those other things. They can take your attention away from truly growing in a personal way. And I'm talking about growing intellectually. So it is important to me to give something back to you. You see, I didn't just get a doctorate so that I could work in an ivory tower, although that is a good thing. I also, though, got my doctorate in the way that Huey P. Newton, co-founder of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, got his doctorate. Now, before I go any further, I want to make a correction to a video that I did probably last week. It might have been episode 2. I was talking about President Trump's inaugural address and the fact that he mentioned a former president, a William McKinley. Well, I got my Williams mixed up, and I actually mistook William McKinley for William Harris. And I was talking about the fact that these early presidents owned slaves. Well, William McKinley did not, and I want to make that clarification. William Harris did. He was the ninth president of the United States, owned slaves, swore he was going to free them. When he died, he did not. And I wanted to make that clear because I know many of you are of African descent, you're African Americans, you're Black people, and we must learn our history. In fact, let me try to find, yeah. Now, this is something that the good Dr. John Henry Clark said. He said, history, I have often said, is a clock that people use to tell their political time of day. It is also a compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. History tells the people where they are and what they are. Most importantly, history tells the people where they still must go. That is so key. History tells the people where they still must go and what they still must be. And I want to show you something that's on the back of that. You might notice in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a picture of a woman, and her name is Queen Mother Moore. Do Google her. I want you to know her. She's a sister that walked with Marcus Garvey. And in the upper right-hand corner, that is the good Dr. John Henry Clark. Both of these people are no longer with us, but they left us quite a legacy. Now, today, I'm actually going to read, before I go to Murder Incorporated by Mumia Abu-Jamal and Stephen Victoria, I'm going to read from the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, because I want to actually go back to our roots in America, not our roots in Africa. That will be later, much later in this series. I want to go back to the origins of Black people in America. And the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass is so key because he was actually an enslaved man who learned to stealthily, he learned to read and write, and he became a great orator, talking against slavery. Okay, now I'm trying to get to something else here. Give me a minute. Let me move this before I go. Oops, wrong thing. I'm still learning, brothers and sisters, about how to maneuver this. So, all right, let's go with this. I'll do this. Okay. So I'm reading from the narrative of Frederick Douglass, 1845. He says, I was born in Tuckahoe, near Hillsborough, and about 12 miles from Easton in Talbot County, Maryland. I have no accurate knowledge of my age, never having seen any authentic record containing it. By far, the larger part of the slaves know as little of their age as horses know of theirs. And it is the wish of most masters, within my knowledge, to keep their slaves thus ignorant. I do not remember to have ever met a slave who could tell of his birthday. They seldom come nearer to it than planting time, harvesting time, cherry time, spring time, or fall time. A want of information concerning my own was a source of unhappiness to me, even during my childhood. The white children could tell their ages. I could not tell why I ought to be deprived of the same privilege. I was not allowed to make any inquiries of my master concerning it. He deemed all such inquiries on the part of a slave improper and impertinent, and evidence of a restless spirit. The nearest estimate I can give makes me now between 27 and 28 years of age. I come to this from hearing my master say sometime during 1835. I was about 17 years old. My mother was named Harriet Bailey. She was the daughter of Isaac and Betsy Bailey, both colored and quite dark. My mother was of a darker complexion than either my grandmother or grandfather. Notice this colorism. Notice this. This is very important when you're back during the age of slavery. My father was a white man. He was admitted to be such by all I ever heard speak of my parentage. The opinion was also whispered that my master was my father. But of the correctness of this opinion, I know nothing. The means of knowing was withheld from me. My mother and I were separated when I was but an infant, before I knew her as my mother. It is a common custom in the part of Maryland from which I ran away to part children from their mothers at a very early age. Frequently, before the child has reached its 12th month, its mother is taken from it and hired out on some farm a considerable distance off, and the child is placed under the care of an old woman too old for field labor. For what this separation is done, I do not know, unless it is to be hindered the development of the child's affection toward its mother, and to blunt and destroy the natural affection of the mother for the child. This is the inevitable result. And that was why, I'm not reading now, I'm talking. That was why this separation was made. It was to indeed turn a human into an animal. That was one of the purposes of enslavement. In fact, notice how earlier Fred Douglass talked about horses, even subtly comparing him and other enslaved people to horses, because during the age of slavery, enslavers wrote about us next to their cattle, next to their horses, next to their crops, tomatoes, potatoes, Negroes, because that's what we were called back then, Negroes. It took a movement to go from Negro to Black to African American. Let me continue. This is Fred Douglass. I never saw my mother to know her as such more than 4 or 5 times in my life. And each of these times was very short in duration and at night. She was hired by a Mr. Stewart who lived about 12 miles from my home. She made her journey to see me in the night. People, do you understand this? traveling the whole distance on foot after the performance of her day's work. She was a field hand, and a whipping is the penalty of not being in the field at sunrise, unless a slave has special permission from his or her master to the contrary, a permission which they seldom get, and one that gives to him that gives it the proud name of being a kind master. I do not recollect of ever seeing my mother by the light of day. She was with me in the night. She would lie down with me and get me to sleep. But long before I waked, she was gone. Very little communication ever took place between us. Death soon ended what little we could have while she lived, and with it, her hardships and suffering. She died when I was about 7 years old on one of my master's farms near Lee's Mill. I was not allowed to be present during her illness at her death or burial. She was gone long before I knew anything about it, never having enjoyed to any considerable extent her soothing presence, her tender and watchful care. I received the tidings of her death with much the same emotions I should have probably felt at the death of a stranger. That's the narrative of Frederick Douglass, which I will be reading more from in later episodes. All right. Now I'm going to be reading from Murder Incorporated, Empire, Genocide, Manifest Destiny by Mumia Abu-Jamal and Stephen Vittorio. Let me see if I can remove this. Again, people, hang with me. I'm still learning how to do these things. Okay. And I'm not doing very well. Let me try this one. Okay, that's really not what I wanted. Let me hide this. Okay, let me go back to the book here. Now, I do want to make this connection between Frederick Douglass and now I'm going to go into not only the making of America, but how America became America. And that too is key because I don't want anyone listening to me to just live in this American experience, okay, getting a job, being a consumer, getting a home, or living in a whatever. You need to know your history. This way, you can decide and plan for not just your future, but your children's future as well. All right. Since the fall of Rome, the Anglo-Saxon Empire, now led by Washington, has been conquering and colonizing people, lands, and resources for the benefit of the powerful. Many times the empire grows through overt violence and massive war, and many other times the empire grows through covert violence and targeted war, usually brutal and out of sight. And still other times the empire grows through targeted economic stratagem. John Perkins, I'm mentioning this name and I highly recommend his books. John Perkins. John Perkins penned two remarkable books on the machinations of the American empire, books written from his experiences on the inside. Confessions of an Economic Hitman and the Secret History of the American Empire. Perkins' work shines a bright light on the dark and ugly tendency of the American government to wreck economic havoc on international entities in support of American corporate interests. American corporate interests, they are the backbone of empire. By the way, for those of you who have the book, I'm on page 81, the bottom. Through his life as an economic hitman, Perkins' research, interviews, and travels thereafter as a committed whistleblower on this specific aspect of empire building. Perkins, along with his students at a number of universities, formulated this overall definition of empire. It's one that's worth repeating here. This is their definition of empire: a nation state that dominates other nation states and exhibits one or more of the following characteristics. One, exploits resources from the lands it dominates. Two, consumes large quantities of resources that amount to a disproportionate size of its population relative to those of other nations. Three, maintains a large military force that enforces its policies when more subtle measures fail. Four, spreads its language, literature, art, and various aspects of its culture throughout its sphere of influence. Five, taxes not just its own citizens, but also people in other countries. Six, imposes its own currency on the lands under its control. Almost without exception, Perkins reports, the students arrived at the following conclusion: the United States exhibits all the characteristics of a global empire. Perkins agrees, and we agree. The United States, check this out, people, listen to this carefully. The United States embodies less than 5% of the global population, 5%, yet consumes at least 25% of the planet's resources. This is accomplished, Perkins writes, through the exploitation of other countries, primarily in the developing world. The United States has built and continues to build, with no end in sight, the largest and most dangerous military ever. And it's a weapon the empire never ceases to use. Although this empire has been built primarily through economics, Perkins reminds us, world leaders understand that whenever other measures fail, the military will step in. There's no doubt that American culture, led by Hollywood, propaganda, and Madison Avenue marketing, wherewithal, dictates public opinion, buying trends and personal desire. With regard to language, the New York Times reports that, riding the crest of globalization and technology, English dominates the world as no language ever has. And some linguists are now saying it may never be dethroned as the king of languages. At first glance, many folks would argue that the United States doesn't tax foreign countries or citizens, and that the United States dollar hasn't replaced anything. In fact, the dollar has stiff competition from other currencies. But Perkins and many others argue that the American corporations does indeed impose global taxation, and that the United States dollar remains the prevailing currency in world markets. The process began at the end of World War II, when the gold standard was modified, Perkins explains. Dollars no longer be converted by individuals, only by governments. Here's how it worked. During the 1950s and 60s, credit purchases were made abroad to finance American growing consumerism, the Korean and Vietnam Wars, and Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. When forest businessmen tried to buy goods and services back from the United States, they found that inflation had reduced their dollars. In effect, they paid an indirect tax. Their governments demanded debt settlements in gold. On August 15, 1971, the Nixon administration refused and dropped the gold standard altogether. After that, economic tap dance, the United States used heavy influence and pushed hard on world markets to continue accepting the dollar as standard currency. Perkins reveals an economic mission he was personally involved with that helped to cement the dollar's world position as king of the hill. Check this out. Under the Saudi Arabian money laundering affair, that's Perkins, helped engineer in the early 70s the Royal House of Saud committed to selling oil for only United States dollars. For only United States dollars. And you see, countries around the world need oil. Because the Saudis controlled petroleum markets, the rest of OPEC, that's the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, was forced to comply. As long as oil reigned as the supreme resource, the dollar's domination as the standard world currency was assured, and the indirect tax would continue. Perkins begins his best-selling expose, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. That is a must-read for you. With this description of how Washington surreptitiously operates in the shadows. Economic hitmen are highly paid professionals who cheat countries around the globe out of trillions of dollars. They funnel money from the World Bank, the United States Agency for International Development, and other foreign aid organizations into the coffers of huge corporations and the pockets of a few wealthy families who control the planet's resources. I'm going to read that again. I'm just going to talk it. There are a few wealthy oligarchical families that control the wealth of the earth. So understand where we are living, people. Their tools include fraudulent financial reports, rigged elections, payoffs, extortion, sex, and murder. They play a game as old as empire, but one that has taken on new and terrifying dimensions during this time of globalization. I'm going to stop here for a moment because I really want you all who are listening to me to understand this. America didn't just become wealthy because of the erudition of Europeans that became white Americans. No. America became America because of the genocide of the Native Americans, the implantation of English Americans breaking away from Britain, and then the enslavement of African people from that platform of genocide, war, slavery, and understand slavery lasted for at least 2 centuries or more. Some scholars say 250 years, others 300, others 400 years. Now, I started off today with Frederick Douglass. He did not know his mother. He did not really know his father. And let me just tell you this about slavery. Slavery was a condition that went along with the mother. That is, if your mother is a slave and she gives birth to children, her children are slaves. Now, this was legal. This was the law. But check this out. Look how that left out the white male. If the white male fathered a child, well, and raped a black woman who was a slave, well, that child is a slave. Slavery was legal. The way that Frederick Douglass did not know his mother, that was legal. The fact that his mother was brilliant enough to be able to walk from a far off plantation that she had been sold to come back to her previous plantation to see her baby boy. This is one of the awful facts about enslavement. And it also brings up this point. If you are enslaved, then how much can you really love? How much attention should you really pay to your children when your children are not your children? Now, I am emphasizing this point because I know, and science proves me right, memory does not die. So that kind of separation from mother and child, or mothers and children, and fathers, Black fathers, I mean, as well. Black people, the Negro people, the enslaved people had to develop a psychological way that they could live through that hell. And I believe that some of that distance has traveled throughout the centuries, even into the current day, where you will find some Black people behaving in ways that are unconscionable. So, brothers and sisters, I'm going to close this session for today because I'm still trying to figure out if I am handling my media overlays correctly. All of this is new to me and I'm by myself today. But if you ever want to get in touch with me, I'm sure you see the banner below. I invite you to come to my website. Also, because I have a lot of information there on the Black Panther Party for self-defense. Now, Readings with Regina comes on twice every week. I come on a Tuesday and again on a Thursday at 2 p.m. And I think next Tuesday is the 28th, January 28th. So I'll be on January 28th and January 30th. And what I will do is pick up on where I left off here. So, beloved, until we meet again, thank you.